screen nicely now. And please go ahead to using the chat during our second webinar. So I'll say welcome to our second webinar for blended learning in language teaching. Last week, that's where I was at the IATEFL conference, and if I could share my best moment at the conference, it was during Nikki Hockley's talk for Cambridge, introducing their blended learning program, and her first slide was definitions of blended learning, which you were having a look at last week on the platform. And I think you can see the second definition there was Sharma and Barrett. So I was very, very excited, and I took a photograph of that particular slide. So IATEFL was wonderful this year. Welcome again to our moderator this afternoon, Kevin, who'll be able to answer any of your questions in the chat. He assures me that this is Southampton. It's not my own particular image of Southampton, but it's very close to where Kevin lives. That's where he's speaking to you. So it was lovely to be with all of you that could join webinar one. On the top left is Burgos, who I think at the moment is trying desperately to get to an internet connection now. And if you couldn't join us, thank you for watching webinar one in your own time on the YouTube channel. So this is webinar two, which is divided into two parts. First of all, we'll be looking back and giving you a chance to reflect on week one and ask any questions or make any comments. And I'll pause in the middle of this webinar in order for you to do that. And then the second part of the webinar will be looking forward to the materials next week, which is looking very, very much at English language teaching materials and learning platforms. So let's start then looking back at week one. And after the first webinar on the research, last week you had a chance to consider the roots of blended learning, various definitions and dimensions, and a number of models. And it's very interesting as you look back at the origins of blended learning that they were there to save costs in business. So you could mix the study from books and the internet and so on with not sending people to an expensive hotel. And it's a pity, a great pity, that education, I think, has inherited this view of blended learning, that blended learning is there in order to save teacher costs, for example. But those were the roots. You had a look at definitions, and I'm sure you're all aware that this course is not a blended learning course. This is a 100% online course, and we're going to adhere to the classical definition of face-to-face plus online. You looked at a number of definitions, broad and narrow, positive and negative, but we didn't look at the dimension of blended learning being disruptive. If you've heard of blended learning being disruptive, or you have an idea of what it is, could you just type your idea into the chat box? If anybody's ever heard of blended learning as being disruptive. I'm just looking at the chat. I just want to say that this idea is that you are teaching in your classroom. You're trying very hard to teach, but the students are out on the internet all the time, and they are doing their own learning through their own personal learning networks. And sometimes what they're learning is different to what you're teaching in the class. And that's given rise to this if you like, connotation of blended learning as being disruptive. Okay, let's move on. And 1 second. Okay, you had a chance to look at the percentage models. Thank you to everybody for your work in the platform. I saw some people decided exactly how many percentage they did in terms of online and face-to-face, dual track, and flipping was a very, very big part of last week. And I think that this brought up one of the big crucial issues that came up last week, which was how do you get your students to do the work online? So we have the term homework. I think that's been around for ages, but some people who are flipping, and could I just mention Jesus here? Jesus is a real expert in flipping, and I think he'll be able to help us sometimes in the forums about what it means. But to me, if they're not doing their homework, in a flipping scenario, that's actually completely different because, of course, in a flipped model, it's not really homework, it's actually is going out in the online. So I'm going to start a new thread on the forum. It's called "How do you get your students to do your homework?" And I'm just going to ask for ideas. Here's one idea. If you say, watch the video for homework, at the end of the week, your students, some of them will have watched it and some of them might not have watched it. If you say, at the end of the course, the first assignment is watching this video and then summarizing it, 100% of the students will watch the video. Why? Because you've made the video part of the way that the students are being assessed. So that will be one way. It may not work in every situation, but that's a very, very crucial thing. If students are not doing the online work, that seems to be a problem facing most people. So I don't want to talk about it now in the webinar, although I'll leave some time just at the end because I think it might be quite difficult. But having a thread so you can post your ideas would be very, very helpful. So that's going to be something I'll do after this session. Your material didn't mention every model. This was one of the presentations at IATEFL, which talked about the station rotation model. This is a very American model. So if you've heard the station rotation model, please feel free to type in what it is into the chat. I'll just pause for a second if you know what the station rotation model is. And just while we're waiting, we'll be able to go back and have a look at those because the chat, of course, is also recorded and placed on the webinar. But that's something where students have access to some laptops, for instance, in the class, but not all at the same time. So your students are moving round, rotating, if you like, and going onto the station. So if that slide is interesting, this is a different way of looking at models, then I'll summarize that slide and post it onto the Learning platform. So we're going to move on now. And last week we asked you, why blend? What are the challenges that you face and what success factors are there for successfully blending? And thank you so much to everybody's final forum post. I think it was very, very interesting that we could go and read everybody's thoughtful comments. This is quality over quantity. It's not how much you write. I think it's the fact that you've been thinking about what you want to write and why. And for me, that was one of the most amazing reasons why people blend, something that Burgos wrote, how difficult it is to get printed materials in Venezuela, you know, course books and so on. And Jose Gregorio said exactly the same thing. I hope everybody was successful in reading everyone else's posts. It made for very, very interesting reasons, but that was one reason that I'd never considered before, but that's a reason why people are moving to digital and online types of material because of the expense of print. Time, this really came up at the IATEFL conference. There's not enough time to learn a language in the poor hours, the few hours that we have teaching. So Jesus mentioned, it helps making the best of time. This is something Fauzi wrote. You wrote one of your concerns is to spare as much time as possible for speaking. So if you want to make your classes free for speaking, then moving other things to the platform is a reason why we blend. And then Karim also spoke about the limitations of the classroom. All of these comments you can read in the forum posts. So why? So you not only have face-to-face, but you can include the advantages of online learning. Reach, that's important to Burgos. Burgos, I think, does all his stuff online. But this idea of convenience, studying anytime, anywhere, which Nadia, you also echoed there when you said, it offers my students the flexibility to study at their convenient time and place. And going at your own speed. Have you seen how people are working on this course? It's very interesting, isn't it? Who is posting when? Everybody's got a different way depending on their workload and so on. And then to differentiation, and this is something that Tara spoke about in her forum post. My classes usually have students at different levels with different learning styles who need a variety of strategies in order to acquire the content. The old days where 30 students were all the same have long gone now. We think of 30 individuals in the class. So blended learning in order to attend to the various differences. Why? To encourage learner autonomy. So Marta, this is one thing that she wrote at ITESM. Teachers are expected to encourage learner autonomy. So I'm going to call a poll now, guys. This is where I'd like everybody to please type into the chat room. And I'd like you to type either H, M, or L. So H, that would mean that in your educational background in your countries, most students you feel are fairly highly autonomous. M, they have a medium level of autonomy, and low would be clearly students that have an educational system which is very transmissive, they're quite passive, and they're probably unlikely to be very autonomous at the beginning of a blended learning course. So Mexico, Venezuela, Tunisia, Morocco, please vote for your country, and we'll be able to go back and have a look to see if everybody from Mexico typed exactly the same letter, which is very, very interesting because, of course, there's individual differences. So it's not scientific, but we'd just like to see really how your students are in the area of learner autonomy. So M for Mexico, L, H, M, M, L, L. Very interesting. So I think that if you are in an L area where your students have low autonomy, then clearly your blended course will start in a different way as you start to encourage students to become more autonomous. Thank you very much for that voting. I'll be very interested to go back and have a look at that. Okay, so let's finish off the why. That was one of the reasons that I thought was extremely important in order to have better learning outcomes. That's why we're blending. Although, as we mentioned in the research part of webinar 1, this is very hard to define what a better what a better outcome actually is, and actually to show it or to prove it. So we've looked at why, the challenges that you face. I believe that one of the biggest challenges is most of our teachers take a training course such as the CELTA or the Delta, and they are trained by reading books by Jim Scrivener, Jeremy Harmer, and so on, into what classroom teaching is all about. But very few teachers really have been trained in something completely different, which is what Burgos's school does, which is 100% distance learning. It's a different literature. You may need to read works by Gilly Salmon, such as E-tivities, or the book Teaching Online by Nikki Hockley. And if you do teach online, people clearly go through a different set of phases in their online development. Now, I'm not going to spend any time looking at purely online teaching, but even if you have a look at this course, you can see at the beginning, people are probably a little bit worried at the moment about access. I already feel in week 2 a lot more comfortable speaking to you, a lot more smiling faces, people that I know as we get to know each other in the online environment. And then I hope we'll be exchanging information, and by the end of this course, we'll be constructing knowledge across the internet. But a classroom teacher may not know those sorts of things. Last week, you read about many of these challenges in the interactive exercises on the platform. The idea of a blended learning course not satisfying anybody because it's a mishmash and not very structured course. And this very common thing that students feel the classroom is mostly important, is always more important than what's happening in the online environment. So we finished last week with the 3 conditions for a successful course, although in the end, I believe there were 4 conditions for a successful course: appropriacy, complementarity, attitude, and training. And I think appropriacy for me is best looked at in the context of speaking. Clearly, if you want to have a classroom discussion, I would say ideally the classroom is the best place to do that. Discussing things in an online environment is way different. If you want people to think deeply, such as we're doing now in our forum posts when you have time, then clearly the forum or the bulletin board is a better environment for that. So everything being appropriate in where it's actually being done. Complementarity, this is sometimes called integration. So there is a clear link. That's absolutely crucial, isn't it? That's also been described as being connected, that there's a connection in some way. And so often that doesn't exist, and that's an absolutely crucial part of a successful course. And finally, attitude and belief being more important than knowledge and skills. So knowledge is just the definition. We know there are various definitions of blended learning and we can read them, but that's so different, isn't it, from actually running a blended course when you're actually doing it. But how you feel about it is so critical, and I think this really came through in your own forum posts. So there is a study which reconfirms the teacher as the key factor to enhance successful blended learning. Whatever that person is doing, that's me now. I'm working with you guys. I'm hoping I'm doing as good a job as I can, tutoring you and leading you through. But it's often the teacher that's mixing up all those different elements in the blend that's critical. And Rossa, this is what Rossa wrote. We know it's important that the teacher believes, knows and feels the positive and beneficial aspects of blended learning. It's not important just to have conceptual knowledge. You have to believe in it. And Maria Teresa, you wrote, I guess the strongest challenge is people's attitude. So I think very, very interesting. I added training to the list, and I just thought I'd show you this slide because for many, many years I've been involved in the training of people with interactive whiteboards, and we never get beyond the introductory stage. You're always introducing people how to use it. But after you've met the interactive whiteboard, that's when you have to change how you teach and then merge the technical knowledge of what the black whiteboard does with your own existing pedagogies. And it just struck me that that was very similar for blended learning, that we learn to blend better as courses continue, and then we begin to change our practice. So that brings me to the end of reflecting back on last week. How to make a success of blended learning was the final part. So I'm going to pause for a few moments now, just as a way of asking you guys if you have any thoughts about week one, if you have any questions about week one, or anything that you want to share with other people using the microphone, in which case just type that into the chat. Kevin, I'm sure, can help to activate or just indicate that you'd like to say something. So, guys, it's over to you. Anything that you want to say about last week? Please go ahead. Okay. It's quite quiet out there. So I don't know if that's okay. I can take that as a sign that we can move on. Yeah, okay. I'm going to move on in that case, but I would like to say, oh, hang on, Kevin's just indicating something to me. Ah, great.
Concerning training, I think that training is essential for both the teacher and the students. If the teacher doesn't know how to work on online or on a course online in order to coach his students and facilitate that work for them, it will not be he will not be able, or they will not be able to help the students with that, and even change their attitude towards using technology. The same thing for students who are not used to using technology. If they don't know how to use it appropriately, they won't be motivated and engaged in learning online.
Right. So you're saying it's very, very important, the actual training of people in how to use the tools. Yeah.
Also, Wilza had something to say as well. Would you like to speak about that, Wilza? I can't see you, sorry. There you are. Would you like to speak about that, your comment, Wilza?
Yes, yeah. I was typing that one of the articles made me realize that in a way blended learning has been used all the time. It's nowadays that we call it blended learning because we have technology and it's the so traditional methods. But if I really think about how we taught 20 years ago, we were blending materials at that time. The tape recorder, and then listening or watching movies and reading from magazines, because we didn't have computers, internet, so we were looking for magazines and newspapers from the United States in our case, so that we had these materials, new materials in the classroom. So we were blending, we were using not only the grammatical approach or the communicative approach, we were using different methods. So I think that at that time we had already the blending learning.
Yeah, could I just answer that, Rossa? Because I think it's a very, very interesting point. This is broad. Mm-hmm. This view that we've always used little bits of technology, you know, from the language lab through to audio, through to CD audio, through to podcasts and now vodcasts and so on. And this is a very broad approach, and it's a very, very true thing. We would just blend. We would just teach communicatively. So it's quite interesting. And that's why I think there are so many different definitions. So what you've said then is completely true from a broad perspective.
Yes.
And then from a narrow perspective, I would say when I taught in Madrid in 1980, I taught 1 hour, and then 167 hours later, my students would come back. They hadn't done anything. There was no internet in those days. They just came back and they'd forgotten everything. and I had to say, do you remember the words? And they would say, no, we don't
No.
remember. So, you know, so clearly there, hello. Lots of young learners enjoying this. Anyway, so it's very, very interesting. Okay, well, we're in the middle of our webinar, guys, so I'm going to move now to the second part, but it was
Just,
really
one
nice.
thing, Pete.
Oh, yes.
For attitude, teaching, I think, is one of the most conservative fields, and teachers are not all teachers are really open to new technologies or new methodologies in order to use in class.
Right.
In my case, many of the teachers in my institution were really reluctant to use any technology or use blended learning.
Right. Yeah, it's quite interesting how attitude is so important, and there is something which is called dissonance, which is where a teacher who uses technology in their own life often doesn't apply that to their educational life. Very, very interesting feature that's been noted. Okay, well, I noticed that Tere has written that she loved the platform, and I think that one of the secret results of this month that you're sharing is that you'll get familiar with a different platform, and platforms is going to lead me on to the second part of our webinar this afternoon, which is the world of materials, the world of digital materials. And we'll be looking at publisher-produced digital materials next week, and also online platforms. So what I'm doing for the next 30 minutes, more or less, is introducing you to the various topics from next week. So before we begin, I have a poll for you, and I'd just like to think of the typical courses that you're running. And when you start those courses on the very first morning, do you have a handful of books? Are you issuing your students with a course book, usually, as part of their typical course? So please just type A. Thank you very much. Nadia has typed A already for yes. B means no. So there may be a few no's from Venezuela, where clearly printed materials are very difficult to get hold of. And if you type C, you have a bit more of a complicated answer. But just type that in if you would. Thank you. Yeah. I'll take N, meaning no. The right. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's very interesting that already I noticed that the letters in the chat are different. And I think that there is a huge conundrum connected with materials. When you see a complicated diagram like this, please remember I'll make a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation and I'll post it to the forum. So, not the forum, excuse me, to your platform. So if you'd like to study it in more detail, but clearly at one end of this line on the left-hand side is giving your students a high quality, up-to-date English language teaching course book, which might be global or it might be completely locally produced. So in Mexico, the actual book that you're given is from a publisher that works in Mexico and is not in Oxford or Cambridge. You might do things yourself. You may use photocopies, or you may believe in teaching unplugged. Teaching unplugged on the right is dogme. I'm just going to pause for a second and just check if everybody is happy with the term dogme. I'll just type it in to the chat. If you've heard of this movement, the dogme movement, if you haven't heard of it and you want me to tell you more, that's absolutely fine. I can drop a post, but basically Okay, thanks, Tara. Thanks. Basically, dogma would believe very much that you walk into the classroom and use your students as a resource from the beginning of the class and work only with what's in the room. So these are very strong. Yes, it is very much like dogmatic, but it's actually from the Danish film school that didn't want all the expensive props. But what's central is you cannot have a course book. A course book is written for no group of people. It's just written in an ideal world. It doesn't actually match what your students need. If your students are Syrian refugees and they're going to live in Germany, nobody's written that particular course book, so you only work from the student. So really, materials it's a highly controversial area. There are many issues in evaluating only materials, let alone digital materials, such as timing, whether your teacher is experienced or not, whether they're using the students and so they're not actually teaching the materials. As Jim Scrivener said, the materials are just there, they're actually teaching the students. So at this moment, I think our course will divide, like this road or street that I discovered in, I was in Oman when I had to decide if I wanted to go right down lane or I wanted to go left down way. But one route is a publisher produced materials route, and the other route is a completely different route where you or your students or your teachers are creating their own materials, DIY, do-it-yourself route. So, before we begin, I just want to just focus very, very briefly on some digital materials. So, if you typed yes for course book, if you open the student's book, there will probably be a CD-ROM or a DVD-ROM at the back of the book. There may be an e-workbook. I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. Or nowadays, many of the books have an access code which you scratch off, and students have access now to e-books. There are lots of materials, and we don't have time on this course to go deeply into these materials because we're looking at blending. So if you evaluate those materials, you need to be aware of different ways of setting up your evaluation. So this picture is a picture of one of the PDFs in your second week's materials. So if you're very interested in evaluating digital materials, and some people have been talking already about the materials that they use, please have a look at Phil Hubbard's work. I evaluate materials for the EL Gazette. I'm a reviewer. So I put the materials in my computer and I play around with them, but I'm just judging them. I'm using the first evaluation type. So I will say, I think that this material is quite good. Okay. The other way of evaluating materials is to actually see what your students do with the material. So imagine your students are using a complicated program. Your computer can actually assess the number of keystrokes that your students make. So you can actually generate data. This is an empirical evaluation of materials. So I believe that when it comes to digital, there are many additional complexities. I must say this is one of my favorite quotes of all time about digital material. It's not so much the program, it's actually what you do with it. And that's really critical, I think. And it makes our job so much more difficult when you are judging materials. It's not what's on the page, it's what the teacher's actually doing in the classroom working with that material. So if you are using a course book, could I just say, please, over the next few moments, please feel free to type in the name of the most popular book that your institution is giving out, because then when we go back next week and look at the chat, I'll be able to see some of the things that you're using. I'll pop back and have a look at that later, because clearly if you're using some kind of materials, such as here you can see Macmillan materials on the left, OUP on the right. Great. I'm really, really pleased that some titles are coming in. That's going to be very, very useful, because this is an e-workbook. This is another ebook. This is going to influence greatly the choice of platform. That's what we're moving on to now. The choice of platform may come from the materials you're choosing. There's a whole new generation now of tools. This is one thing I saw recently, which runs off the platform. And I think that more and more publishers now have a publisher's platform. So this is taking me on. I'm going to pause for a second and say, I've been talking about established materials. CD-ROMs have been around for a long, long, long time. And many times when you say CD-ROM, people say, how old-fashioned is that? CD-ROMs, we used to use those 8 years ago. You know, now things have moved on. And I think the way that they've moved on is that at the back of the course book, you have a code, and you scratch that off and you go up now to the platform. So what I'm speaking about now for the next 10 minutes are all the different kinds of VLEs. And this is what is on your platform next week. This is what will be the content of the study, having a look at those different kinds of platforms. So I've listed them here, and we're going to start off with publishers' LMSs. LMS, Learning Management System. When we've looked at publishers' LMSs, we'll go on to other kinds of VLEs. Some have been created for a social reason. And number 4 is the virtual learning environment that you are using on this course. English 360 is probably the best example today of a platform created with authoring tools. Then we'll move on to virtual classrooms. I don't know as much about virtual classrooms as Burgos. I'm sure when he joins us later, he'll be able to help us, and then finish off mentioning other kinds of tools. So I hope you guys are okay. I hope you're ready, and we'll start off with publisher LMSs. So let me go to the very first one here. If you are familiar with Richmond materials, and I think Richmond are one of the biggest publishers in Mexico, for example, then you may be using the big picture. If you are, then the very first picture will be familiar, because this is Richmond's learning management system. And now the students go in and use those digital materials. So each learning management system is going to be slightly different. Somebody typed in company. I saw someone typed in company. So if you go down to the right, you'll notice that the latest version of in company doesn't really come with all those discs that the series came with a few years ago. Now you have your code. Now the video is housed on the publisher's learning management system. So we can be sure that most of the big published course books now are linked to materials. Here's another example, OUP. And what this will show you is that you have tracking materials. so sorry, down at the bottom of that slide, you can see lots of different colored squares showing how long your students have been on online, how long they've not been online. So these are materials which are available for students studying from OUP materials. I noticed that Tara has typed the word touchstone, and I'm very glad that she's typed that word, because that's one of the most famous examples of a blended learning course. In fact, it's this next slide, Touchstone, and there you can read a little bit about Touchstone, and it's very interesting that Tara is starting to use that particular course. There are other things, of course, digital. Clarity, who are based in Hong Kong, use Road to IELTS. Burlington English, who are based, I believe, originally in Israel, have actually created voice recognition, a speech training a component. I'm going to pause for a moment, because I think this is very, very similar to the image of a walled garden. In other words, if you teach with Touchstone, you know about Touchstone. Nadia is a very, very good example of somebody that knows a lot about one particular type of material, the Dyned materials that I saw you present in Medellin. And if you don't know, you don't know these materials. And I think that this is a great moment on this course, because we could see all the different types of materials that people will know. And I think it's really interesting that Touchstone is one of the most famous examples of blended learning materials throughout the world. And it's been studied, and there is now a research project all about using Touchstone. And I believe that I'm an expert in this field, and I don't know Touchstone materials. That's a good example of the walled garden effect. So you might put in this category MEC, Macmillan English Campus. Could you just type yes in the chat if you know, if you have been inside the Macmillan English Campus? I believe it was massively popular in Mexico and probably still is. So thank you, Rossa. It's really good to know that you know these. And in a way, it's crazy to talk about Macmillan English Campus in the same way as, for example, the Richmond materials. They are completely different. I actually did my master's dissertation evaluating the Macmillan English Campus. It's very, very different. It's so different because the material is created by world expert writers in working for Macmillan, and there is a massive bank of material which is wholly different to other kinds of system. And I think this is the problem that we have at the moment. We often don't compare like with like. That's quite interesting. Okay, so I finished talking about publisher materials now. Okay, these are materials that you can already get created, and they're within the publisher's program, and you have to pay usually for those, or your students have bought the book and you have to you know, scratch off the code. So let's move on to the second area, and could you just type yes if you know Moodle? Moodle is the picture on the right. So again, it's very interesting that there's quite a few yeses going in. So that's interesting because Moodle is open source. Moodle is one of the world's most famous educational platforms created as part of a socio-constructivist approach to language learning. Another very big VLE, virtual learning environment, that's used by universities is this one on the left. This is the one I used at Oxford Brookes University, and you can clearly see that it's very, very different. Moodle is the same platform at the bottom because you can change the actual interface of the platform. When I was in Peru, this Camilo was the platform of choice. If you go to the internet and look at how many learning platforms there are, I think we can safely say that there are probably hundreds. Neo is one that I came across. So clearly, VLEs, just the virtual platform, that's another big area when you choose your platform, the most appropriate platform for your own context. Are you on Facebook? I think Jesus would laugh at this question because he did a brilliant presentation in Venezuela recently on the British Council Day on Facebook. So I'm going to imagine that everybody in this group has a Facebook page. If, yes, it's a Facebook addict, as you describe yourself. Yeah, and I think it's extremely interesting that Edmodo, which is the platform here that you can see on your screen, has the same color as Facebook. It's blue. The interface could be very, very familiar to students who are used to using Facebook. But the difference with between Facebook and Edmodo is a safe environment. Facebook can have safe areas, but the whole point of this platform is communication. Real-time communication, posting pictures, communicating with your students. So that's another kind of platform. Okay, let me move on. I'm just going to briefly mention English 360 because clearly everybody has a very, very nice opportunity on this course to get familiar with this platform. It's been created in order to use not only publisher-produced material, but to import authentic material and also your own Word documents, which you can then change in order to create a similar look for the whole course. In other words, the students are taking one course, but there are different sources of the material. And this is a good moment to mention digital assets like video, audio, and the fact that platforms today, you can reorder the material in the order you want. Just something really interesting on Richmond's platform, by the way, guys. Richmond invites you to reorder the materials. That's very interesting because publishers' platforms are often described as closed. English 360 is an open platform. It's open because you are allowed to upload your material and personalize that material. So these pictures will start to look familiar to you now that you're working using this platform. So let's move on. We've not finished, guys. I'm so sorry. There are many, many, many platforms, and that's really what I wanted to say in this webinar, that there are so many. What if you want to teach? What if you actually want to have your students come into a room? Well, maybe you would choose WizIQ. And that's a really interesting platform where you can see the picture of the teacher. I don't know, that's a particularly not very good looking teacher there. I don't know what that person's doing in that room, but there we go. But they're using a whiteboard. And in one of our future webinars, I'll try to use the whiteboard in Zoom, which is a tool clearly for this kind of talking across the internet. BigBlueButton is another kind of platform built for online teaching. I think when you have a VLE as a repository, That's one thing, just a place to put things, but clearly actually using teaching tools is quite different. And that brings us right the way through to Skype, right the way through to Burgos's area of online teaching, where you might actually be teaching a course on the platform. So let's stop there. That's the end of sort of VLE type things, but clearly it's not the end of platforms. There's other stuff that's around. Blogs. If any of you guys have a teaching blog, please send me the link and we can post that onto English 360 and we can spend some time having a look at what you do. Wikis are free to set up and can be very, very useful if you're extremely interested in writing and the writing process. Maybe you just want a space to put things, and your students can access huge documents like PowerPoints and dissertations and so on, and you can all have access to that place. So I think you can see from this very, very short overview that there are many, many kinds of virtual learning platforms. I've just broken them down like that this afternoon to say that some of them, you don't make the material, the publisher does that. Others are business created virtual learning platforms, but then there are platforms where the main aim is socialization, which is very, very popular with particularly with a certain kind of young learner. Some platforms are very good if you want to create digital materials, others to actually teach, and then there are even more platforms. So maybe your brain looks like this at the moment. My brain looks like this. In other words, there's lots of different platforms, lots of different kinds, but a lot of them do very similar things. There's a forum on Moodle, there's a forum on English 360, but clearly they're really quite different. Our forum is not nested. That's why I'd be really happy that people have been going very carefully and just posting their assignments one below the other. So that leads me towards the end of our webinar, where I've really been introducing the work for next week, which is a huge area, and it's, I think, really useful if you decide which part of that big area you're going to be doing your exploration. And I hope that you have a nice week working through the materials in your own time and comfortably, but I will just say that there are 2 assignments next week, so please don't panic at this point. Take a deep breath and think, okay, I better start my assignments a bit earlier. So the very, very first one, and this is all on your platform, you'll be able to look at a publisher platform. Now, could I just say, you're very busy. I know you're very busy. What are you going to do next week? My feeling is if you don't have much time, you might want to be very, very safe. Take a platform that you know, think a little bit about it, and then post your thoughts onto the platform. I am hoping if we have 12 people, there will be 12 different platforms assessed. That would be absolutely fantastic. So, Jesus knows Facebook inside out. He knows it back to front and upside down. If Jesus has no time, he could write about Facebook in just 10 minutes. However, my argument with Jesus is that I would prefer to use Edmodo rather than Facebook because of privacy issues. So, if you don't know Schoolology, for example, these are the platforms named in your, and you might say, okay, why don't I use this course to find out about another platform? So please choose which one you want, a publisher platform, a VLE, or maybe some kind of thing like Google+. I ran a course on Google+. I didn't know anything about it, and it was really interesting. Oh, it's really nice to see that ITESM in Mexico uses Schoolology, because I'm dying to know more about Schoolology. Lots of people tell me about this. I would love to read a little evaluation. I think that's how we can use our course to really benefit each other. So that's your first assignment. Before we go to the next assignment, I have a poll for you, and I'd like you to type in whether your answer is A, B, C, D, E. And I'm going to start at the bottom with E. E means that you teach. You don't write materials, and you won't be writing materials anytime soon. So that is E. You're not a materials writer. Let's move up to D. You've never written materials, but you'd like to. These could be print materials or digital. C. You already create materials for your own classes. So Marley, hi, thank you very much. You've typed in the letter C. You can definitely type in more than one letter. B, you create materials for your school. Now there's a big difference between B and C, because C always works. You wrote them, you know how to use them, you do everything invisibly to make sure they work. But B, you have to give them to someone else, and they come to you and say, this didn't work. And you say, but didn't you do this? Didn't you do this? And you have to look at the meta language around your materials and give people information and rubrics. Or A, and I'm very happy to type A, I'm an experienced materials writer, and maybe you even have a book. And if you have a book, tell us about your book. We will try and promote it in the industry, in the platform. So thank you very much for all your letters, and this is going to influence very, very much your next task. This is your second task next week is creating your own digital material, just one small exercise. And I'd be very, very happy if everybody could just invest a small amount of time making one exercise in a digital platform. So before you do that, you'll notice next week we'll take you through the common exercise types that you can find within digital. It will ask you the question, is it easy? I think everybody knows the answer to that question. I hope you do. What about that question? It's exactly the same, isn't it? It's exactly the same question, A and B. But I think there's a powerful argument that B is more difficult, and that's what we're thinking of course, as materials writers, the level of cognitive difficulty. So next week, we can take you through all the different types of exercises which are common, and it will show you how you can make these, for instance, in English 360 if you'd like to, and which language aim that template is good for. So next week we'll take you through things to think about if you are authoring materials, the kinds of feedback that you're giving, right or wrong, the problems that you have. If you have a type-in box, what will your students type in? Will they type in a capital letter or a small letter? Will they type in an apostrophe? What if they type in the right word, but they spell it incorrectly? It's an absolute nightmare to have a type-in box if you are going to predict all the things that your students will type in. There are many things that you need to consider as a digital materials writer, and one of them is the difference between crisp and fuzzy language. Crisp, ABC, very easy. Fuzzy, very, very difficult. What's the difference between will and going to? That's okay, that's maybe needs very careful handling in that environment. So that's one thing that you'll be doing, creating a material. A lot of you are flipping. If you flip, excuse me to say that, if you flip, how are you giving the lesson to your students? What are you doing? Maybe you're creating a video, for instance, with this kind of software. Maybe you're just using your mobile phone. Look at that. What a beautiful thing, isn't it? That you can just use that a voice recorder. Maybe you're creating audio. If you flip, you must see EduCreations, because Mexico said that they shared all their materials. Can you think that's what EduCreations is? Everything you create is somebody else's. And that's worth saying about English 360, by the way, guys. Anything you make in English 360, you can give to any other teacher in your school, any other teacher on this platform. It's a collaborative tool. Maybe you can film things. So assignment B is very small. Just make a little exercise. That's all you have to do. But when you work through the material, it suggests that the best exercises are pedagogically good. It might be as easy as, is it make? Is it do? Simple. But clearly the student is still thinking about their answers. So the best exercises are easy. So if you choose to try to make something in English 360, I'm really bad at doing this, so it might take you some time. We have created a place for you to go. So did you see that? On that slide, it says, click here to go to the sand pit. So next week, I'm going to open your materials now. You can go to a sand pit and you can create an exercise in English 360. Try out the tools if you would like to. If you'd like to do that, if that's useful for you. I'm going to open different folders. I've opened the first folder there and I've called it Venezuela. So maybe if you're creating materials and you're from Venezuela, you could put your material there. I'll create another folder called Mexico. So it just makes it easier. I could create 12 folders if you like with your individual name. That's possible, but I don't think everybody will choose to do this assignment in English 360. You might choose something else, and I would suggest choose something that's going to be useful for you. If you have to flip next week and you have to create a video next week for your real class, do it for homework. That's a fantastic use of time. Then it's not homework, you're actually doing something useful. So that's your sandpit. If you choose not to use English 360, you could choose clearly hot potatoes, but hot potatoes is a bit old-fashioned. But it's another place that you can create material. Okay, so I hope I've brought you to the end. I'm sorry it's 2 minutes late. I'm very European and very English, so I have to apologize for that. But I would like to say, I hope it's given you a good idea of the big issues that we're looking at next week, all the different areas, digital materials, and then at the end, make one. It's really important to make something because this course is to give you informed choices, and many people say, I don't like the materials on the campus. I don't like the materials the publishers make. And then you make one and you go, ah, that was so difficult. I'm really happy that the publishers supply me with these materials because I am not going to spend the rest of my school year making materials, you know. So it's quite good to get a feel of both sides. So enjoy the week, and please tell me with your microphone on or typing into the chat, where am I going next weekend?
Everyone's unmuted now.
Okay.
So you can speak.
No idea.
No idea. No. It's in Europe.
Barcelona.
I'll type the answer. No, Kevin, you're wrong. I'll type in the answer now. There you go. The Guggenheim Museum.
Oh, wow. Well,
I'm going to Spain next week, so it might be a good idea
I'm
to
going to mute all of them.
So
You'll need to unmute yourself, Pete. Right, go.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry we have to transfer to Monday because, of course, I'm eating beautiful food and drinking Rioja in Spain. I think maybe the number of participants will fall because this is right in the middle of your working week, Monday the 25th. So maybe during the week you can send me a message if you know you can't come. And if nobody can come at all to the webinar, it might be better for me to sit at home and record the webinar for you. And actually, so in answer to the question, what time, whatever time it is for you now, it's the same time next week. So in British time, it's 3 p.m., same as Tunisia, so it'll be 3 o'clock on Monday. Mexico, I'm so sorry, 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning next Monday. If you can't come, of course you can't come. If it's difficult, then I will record the webinar and then post it, and we might just have to miss. But if a few people can come, fantastic. I think it's lovely to meet you all online. So thank you very, very much for coming. I'm going to say, I hope to see you next week, and have a lovely, lovely week. Please don't stress with your course materials, but please know that you can always email, and I think now you are building up an idea of using the forums and talking to people. So thank you, Kevin, for hosting us.
Thank you, Pete.
I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and I'm going to open up materials for week 2 now. Please let me get a cup of coffee, and then I promise I'll open up your week 2 materials so you can start as soon as you like. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Kevin. Bye, everybody. Bye.